Hello, and welcome to Gardener's World. It's always a sad moment when I have to deconstruct these large pots of tulips and wallflowers, but they've done really well this spring, flowering right into the third week of May. But now their day is done. And anyway, we're on the doorstep of summer, so we need to start planting for a summer display. And leaving them out is quite tricky because I want to get the bulbs attached to the stems and the foliage if I possibly can. And that's because there's still quite a lot of green left in the plant, and that, as it dies back, feeds next year's bulb. Having said that, not all tulips are worth keeping. Some just don't flower well in the second year. They take ages to build up a big enough bulb. Others you can chuck in the ground and they will keep coming back and flowering 10, even 20 years later. So you just have to experiment and see which ones are good for you. On today's programme, we catch up with Adam in his garden as he creates a woodland scene with shade-loving plants and makes a seating area to admire them from.
It's about really putting yourself in the planting, just so that your view changes, your eye line changes, and you start to engage with nature and what's around you.
And there's another chance to see the film that Frances made last year, where she looks at trees that are an invaluable source of food for bees.
This is a tree heather, and it is awash with flowers. And the lovely thing about this is it smells incredible when you're up close to it.
And I will be moving on to the next stage of the tomatoes that I sowed a few weeks ago, and I hope some of you sowed too, as well as planting out dahlias for cut flowers and also adding sunflowers to the dual garden, which will not only look good for us, but be great for bees too. I've taken away a lot of the soil that was here for the tulips. There are two reasons for that. One, because it will be completely nutritionally exhausted by now. All the goodness will be taken out of it. And two, I made up a very gritty mix for the tulips. Tulips love sharp drainage. What I'm going to plant next needs something that will hold more moisture and be richer. So this is garden compost. So we'll put that in the bottom because I want it to act as a sump. I want the moisture to be held in that. Now I'll move these, which we'll come to later on, and then add the potting compost. This is a mix that is our normal peat-free bark-based compost that we buy in, with quite a lot of sieved garden compost, sieved leaf mould, and a little bit of grit. And if you're potting up big pots for a summer display, it wants to have extra goodness. It's got to feed big plants for months on end. Right, the centerpiece is this. This is a ginger, Hedychium. And it will grow 2-3 times as big and give an incredible starburst display. This is a variety called Assam orange, topped with orange flowers shooting out from the center. A really brilliant exotic plant. Now, it is tender, so even now, if you live in the north and you think there's a risk of frost, hold fire until you know that it's completely past. Now, pull that more to the center. Right, I'm going to pack around that a little. Now, the point about these big pots is that they are a display. So I need more than just the ginger, however spectacular it is in its own right. So I'm going to underplant it. Now, I'm starting with French marigolds. This is a variety of French marigold called French red. And what I like about them is the burgundy red with the bright orange. These are tender too. And you can see that actually there's a lot of root at the bottom. So just break them out. And if you break the roots, that will stimulate regrowth. And I'm going to pop them round the edge like that. And these should keep flowering if you keep deadheading. That is the absolute secret of most of these annuals. Marigolds will do well in full sun, but they'll take a bit of shade too. Right, that will do as a basis, but still, that's not nearly enough. Now, this is a first for me. This is Calibrachoea, and this is a variety called Cali Orange. The great virtue of Calibrachoea is that it's a trailer. It should spill over the edges, and that, of course, adds drama and interest. It's related to petunias. They're a member of the Solanaceae family, so in fact related to potatoes and tomatoes as well. Every week, this will have a water. We have what we call Feeding Friday in the garden, and every container gets a good water and a good feed. And you can use homemade liquid feed, like liquid comfrey, or you can buy seaweed, or if in doubt, you can never go far wrong with a container with a basic tomato feed. And that will keep the flowers coming. Now, that's a little minimal at the moment, but that will quickly grow so that the base of the ginger will be covered, will get spillage over the edge of the pot, and the whole thing will have an energy and a dynamism. Of course, the whole point of a display like this is high drama. In fact, the whole point of the jewel garden is to be as dramatic and colourful as possible for as long as possible. Now, we haven't seen Adam's garden since Easter now. And he's been working on it and developing not just the high bits of drama, but also some of the more subtle areas.
Mrs. Frost has got the longest list of jobs in there you have ever seen. It feels like it is. And I have to do so many before I'm allowed out in the garden. And if you're anything like me, those moments outside, in your garden, whatever, sat on a balcony, are just absolutely glorious. And look, the wisteria, it's doing its thing. And I think it's the first time in all the times you visited that I've been able to show you it really in its full glory. And the scent is incredible. I wish you could smell. For me, though, it's not just the flower, it's the foliage. I love this coppery foliage and the way it sits. It's fantastic, it really is. Anyway, you've not been here for a few weeks and lots happened, so I've got quite a lot to show you. Might recognise that. It's my turkey tray. Oh, no. Hey, that really is perfect timing, is it? If you remember last time, Ash walked through while I was sowing this rocket, and I'm just looking at it, and it's really heavily sown. And I was going to blame the cat because I think I wasn't concentrating. I was more worried about the cat. Anyway, all I want to do now is just start to thin it out. But I'm not going to waste any of them because not only does that smell really, you get that rocket sort of, but the flavour, it's really good. So it's just nice just to, you know, dress a meal. Recognise those? Carrots that I sowed in the box we found in the back of the garage, and instantly, you look at those, the sowing is much better. Obviously the cat wasn't about for those, was he? Have to be a little bit more mindful when it comes to carrots because as you do start to thin them, obviously you start to crush in foliage and that can actually attract the carrot fly. So it's quite nice maybe to mesh these over. If you look behind me, I've got them in the main bed there and then that will give them a bit of protection. But these guys really are not too bad at all. Actually, while we're in here, I've got to show you this. It's a standard gooseberry. I think it works really well there, coming up through the rhubarb. And as far as planting it, it was easy. Just dug a decent-sized hole, lots of organic matter. But it works because it means I get more out of this space. And I think it makes a lovely little punch point as well. And I do like a gooseberry pie. I have wanted to create a quiet seating area for some time, where I can just sit and linger. And I have found a perfect spot in the woodland. For me, this area was created because as I put the woodland together, I had the path coming through, and there was an old log just chucked to one side. And as I was here working, I'd find myself just pausing. And then I started to realise how good the light was through the season, and the dapple shade works really well, the wildlife coming to the space. So what I've got is some old logs that were cut down from an old diseased tree that we had. And I'm going to use those, so I've put 3 in, I've got 1 more to put in there, but they could be even, I don't know, an old crate turned upside down in a border, a pot, even some railway sleepers. I've done it out of that. It's about really putting yourself in the planting, just so that your view changes, your eye line changes, and you start to engage with nature and what's around you. And then the moments become incredibly special. So get this in. As I said, all I'm doing, big chunks of logs, roughly level up, as long as and it's not going to go anywhere because it's so heavy. So once we've got this in place, which as we plant around that, I'll firm it up a bit more. Just firm that in. Come to the planting. I've chosen here, first of all, if you look, the ferns, that lovely sort of texture of that foliage and the light green that will develop as the season goes on. Next to there, you've got the actea, which has got that sort of lovely, soft, grey-blue foliage. And then coming back in here, epimedium, sort of shiny, more or less leathery feel, but like a serrated dagger. And then lastly, this tiny little Solomon seal. It's wonderful little oval leaves. So when it comes to laying them out, it's just going to go in around these seats. It's not going to get too high. It's going to start to really sort of carpet. But when you're sat on the seat, you're looking down on this plant, so you're really starting to see that detail. So ultimately what I'm trying to do all the time is just have this little rhythm and this just repeated patterns. This actea is actually called misty blue, and when you look carefully you can see tiny white flowers going to develop. But what I love about this, as the season develops, you get red tips to the end of the stems with white berries on. So back end of the season looks absolutely fantastic. Just be mindful if you are going to use actea that some people can be an irritant to the skin, and the berries are poisonous. So, but yeah, cracking plant. Let's get that in. Look at this. It's actually a Dryopteris, so it's Dryopteris duartii, which is a good hard-working fern, get to about just under 2 foot. If I can get those roots established over this first season going into the winter, next year the plant won't need quite so much TLC. So, into that soil. There we go. And actually, though it's last, I think this is the star. Epimedium spine tingler. I tried this last year somewhere else and it worked really well, so I've just got my hands on a few more. There we go. These plants are going to get plenty of water when they need it, just to get those roots going. And then next year, I think it'll be pretty well look after itself. With the plants in, it's time now for the finishing touches. I've already put 100 ml of hardcore under this path to stop it sinking. Now I can add the bark on top and finally fill up my bird bath. I made that over the winter, just chiselled out the top of the wood, sealed it up, oiled it, and it looks quite nice. just give you a little element of surprise as you walk through. But it feels all right. I'm just sat here wondering how long I can stay here before Mrs. Frost and the kids actually realise where I've gone.
I've made a very basic seat here in the wildlife garden, which Nellie likes, and Adam's absolutely right. Just sitting, surrounded by plants, having time to think, is not just enjoyable, it's actually really good for your mental and physical health. And this bit of the garden, the wildlife garden, was created some years ago to be good for wildlife and good for humans, to show that the two are not incompatible. And last winter, I moved the pond, and it's early days. I only filled it up with water about 7 weeks ago. And I think that you shouldn't expect too much from a pond in its first year. Just let it settle in, and then you will find frog spawn and newts and dragonflies, and everything starts to click. But it's a wonderful thing to do, to get wildlife into the garden. And of course, the flowers in this part of the garden are designed mainly for pollinators. As many different types of pollinators as we can, but above all bees. Now, over the last few weeks, you've been sending us fabulous films of how you've been using your gardens and how your gardens have been helping you get through this extraordinary time that we're all sharing. And we now visit a garden not far from Adam, actually, in Stamford, in Lincolnshire, where a couple of brothers share with us not just their love of gardens, but also their love of bees.
Hello, I'm Douglas. And I'm Hamish. We would like to show you around our bee-friendly garden. Bees are very important because they pollinate most of the plant food we eat. It takes 12 bees in their whole lifetime to make 1 teaspoon of honey. We inspect our bees every week to make sure they're happy and healthy. We make sure that the queen is laying eggs and they don't swarm. We think it's really important to plant flowers in your garden for the bees. We have planted a row of foxglove, and they absolutely love the apple blossom. Here we have left a corner of our garden to go wild. We have planted a few wildflower seeds, but now we just leave it to do its thing. We think it looks really pretty. Thank you, Gardener's World, for giving us lots of good ideas.
Well, Douglas and Hamish are going to go on to be great gardeners and great beekeepers, and the way they're performing, great television presenters too. That was fantastic. And there are a wide range of plants that you can grow in your garden to attract bees. But do remember that honeybees have short tongues, so they can't reach into those plants that have long tubes, whereas bumblebees can, and quite a few other pollinators too. But if you want to attract honeybees, you need plants with nice, flat, open, simple flower shapes, basically daisy-shaped. And what I'm planting now has got about the flattest, most simple face of all, although it's really dramatic, and those are sunflowers. I always grow sunflowers in here, not just for the bees, but because I love them. Now, at the moment, the dual garden is dominated by this allium purple sensation. But I want to get the sunflowers in now, so that as these die down, the sunflowers will grow up, and we can keep the continuity going for us and for the bees for as long as possible. Now, I've got a couple of different varieties that I'm growing in the dual garden this year. The first one is Velvet Queen. And this has got a sort of orangey, browny tinge to it. I grew this plant from seed, and I will plant it into an open space and just pop it in the ground. At this stage, it doesn't need support of any kind. if we can leave them to grow unstaked for a bit, they grow nice and strong, and it does help. Whereas if you stake them straight away, they never develop such a strong stem. The other type, which I'm growing this year, is claret. This is another reddish, as the name suggests, sunflower. And there are a number of different varieties that will give you browns, caramels, marmalades, going right through to a deep orange. And they all work just as well for the pollinators. These will grow somewhere between 6 and 8 foot tall. They tend to have smaller flowers, but more of them. And if you keep deadheading them, they will produce flowers until the end of summer. Then we leave them so the birds can pick away at the seeds. But it doesn't matter how big a sunflower can grow, even the biggest is nothing like as big as many of the flowering trees that are also really good for pollinators and bees. And this time last year, Francis went down to Sussex to have a look at some of the range of fabulous trees that have flowers which are perfect for bees.
The sound of bees is the sound of spring, as they make their way from flower to flower, searching for the vital food they need. And they do us a favour in return. It's been estimated that 1/3 of the food we eat relies on pollination by bees and other insects. Even closer to home, like here at Gravetye Manor, bees foraging for food in our gardens pollinate our flowers and trees, providing us with a wonderful variety of seeds and fruit. But there's a problem. As a result of habitat loss, pesticide use, disease and intensive farming methods, bee populations are in decline. 1/3 of the UK's bees have disappeared over the last 10 years, making it more important than ever for us gardeners to do our bit to help with this issue. There's a wonderful symbiotic relationship between bees and flowers. Most people don't know bees need a balanced diet like us. They forage for pollen and nectar. As they brush past the stamen, pollen is transferred onto them. The bee then flies away with the pollen attached to it, and this is deposited on the next flower. The bee gets its meal, the flower gets pollinated. By late spring, our flower beds and borders are abuzz with bees. But there is another way that we can provide them with the food they need earlier in the season, and that's by planting bee-friendly trees. The great thing about a tree is that you can get so many more flowers on it than your average garden plant. I mean, just take this Erica arborea. This is a tree heather, and it is awash with flowers for the bees. This is a really good plant for any garden. It's so easy. It will cope with drought and wind, so for a problem spot, this is the tree. And the lovely thing about this is it smells absolutely incredible when you're up close to it. And it makes such a huge impact from far back. But when you look closely, you can really see that detail. Fine little red circles within it, so there's something for everybody. And of course, plenty for the bees. Amelanchier lamarckii is very familiar to us on Garden as Well, but that's because it's such a good doer from a gardening perspective, especially in a small garden. It gives so much. It has lovely form, beautiful blossom, beautiful fruits, and then fantastic autumn colour, especially if you plant this in the sunshine. But more importantly, the blossom offers a really good early source of nectar for bees, and then the fruit later is fantastic because the birds love the seeds. So you could call it a win-win. There are 270 species of bee in the UK, with the vast majority being solitary bees. Different species are more prevalent depending on the time of year and the temperature. Bumblebees tolerate lower temperatures, while honeybees love the warmer weather. This is a tree that bees absolutely love. It's called Cercis, forest pansy. Now, it's a native to North America, but for a small garden, it's absolutely invaluable because it has such a beautiful shape. This has lovely big purple heart-shaped leaves and pink flowers that are yet to open on this. Just a few more days and they'll be open. And the really unusual thing about Cercis is that it flowers on its bare branches. Now, it's believed that where this evolved in the forests of North America, that meant that all kinds of insects, not just flying ones, would have had access to that nectar. So it's something for all the pollinators in our gardens. Pyrus salicifolia, so called because it has willow-like or salix-like foliage. It's a really undervalued tree, but I can hear it buzzing already with bees and other insects, so it's very valued by our wildlife. And they have these lovely clusters of white flowers, but these open flowers are really accessible to bees and pollinators. They'll turn into small, inedible fruits, but birds really love them too. And with silver foliage, it makes it a really lovely addition if you're planting a white garden. Now, I think they can suffer from some rather insensitive pruning, but when you do it carefully and let the natural weeping habit show, it can be an absolutely stunning addition to any garden. This is also a fantastic tree if you live in an urban area because it's very resistant to air pollution, which makes it really good for us and really good for the bees. Now, we're used to seeing bees buzzing all over our orchards, but there are all kinds of ornamental fruit trees that you can buy that do exactly the same thing for pollinators. When you're picking them, though, make sure they have single flowers, because in double flowering plants, those nectaries where the food is have been bred away and replaced by petals. Now, this is an ornamental cherry called taihaku, meaning big white flowers, and you can see why. They are double the size of the average cherry blossom. Probably better for a slightly larger space because it will get quite tall, a lot taller than this, and the spread is huge. But if you have the space, plant one. The bees will thank you. It's important to remember that some trees and plants are pollinated by the wind and other types of insects. So when choosing your tree, check that yours is one the bees will enjoy. So next time you're looking for a new addition to the garden, spare a thought for the bees. Consider planting a tree that will give you structure, flowers, and maybe even some fruit, and be an invaluable source of food for our bees.
I do think that however small your garden, there will be a flowering tree that you can fit in and enjoy, and they just add a floral dimension that is fabulous. A few weeks ago, I sowed some Gardener's Delight tomatoes and suggested that if you hadn't sowed tomatoes, that you should join in and we'd do it together, and I'd take you through the process so that hopefully we can all share a really good harvest later on in summer. And I chose Gardener's Delight because they're lovely to eat straight off the vine. They're not difficult to grow. They tend to be quite robust, and also the seeds are widely available. Now, these are mine, and you can see that they've germinated and have developed what's called the true leaf, which is the leaf that looks like the parent. And as soon as they develop a true leaf, they're ready for pricking out or potting on. So if yours look anything like this, this is what you should do. So a small pot, and I'm just using a normal peat-free potting compost. Hold it by the leaf always and just cut around it to lift it out. And there you have a root ball on that little plant, a really good root system. You drop it into the pot like that, hold it steady, put some soil around it. Now, I'm not going to firm it in at all. Just gently shake it like that and put it to one side. And it is really important to get as much root as you can. And it's worth saying that if you haven't managed to sow seed, and this inspires you to grow some, you may well be able to get young plants. from a garden centre. And it doesn't matter if I slightly bury the stem, because new roots will develop from it. And these are destined for the garden, not the greenhouse. So I won't even think of planting them out for another 3-4 weeks, when the nights are nice and warm. There we go. So we'll put Gardener's Delight, give them a good soak, and these will go back into a protected environment. In my case, a greenhouse, if you've got a cold frame, a windowsill, a porch. But it's important to do this now. Don't leave them in the seed tray. The beauty of tomatoes, and in fact quite a few vegetables, is that you don't need a lot of space to get a really good harvest. And we've had a film sent in from Hampshire, which is my own native county, of a gardener who's got an entire vegetable garden on his balcony.
Hi, I'm Bob, and you join me here on my balcony in Southampton. I've always been keen on gardening and growing my own veg, and that's exactly what my wife and I started to do a couple years back. Today, I just want to show you a few tips and tricks to help make the most of the space you've got, no matter how big or small it is. Firstly, think vertical. Make use of walls and hanging baskets. Here on the balcony, we've got tomatoes growing up one wall, and we've got peas growing up another. We've also turned an old pallet into a vertical herb garden, growing some herbs such as parsley, thyme, and some mint. Secondly, experiment. This year, we're trying to grow some potatoes in old shopping bags, wrapped in hessian. We've also got some lettuce growing in these planters. Finally, choose plants that make you smile and bring you fond memories. But most importantly right now, make space for yourself. Cheers.
I think that was inspirational, Bob. Really good to get as many people as possible to grow some vegetables, regardless of how little space you've got. Just be sure that A, you're allowed to grow vegetables or any plants on a balcony or roof space, and also just make sure it's strong enough, because the extra weight of containers with water and plants may be more than the structure will bear. Now, I love growing chilies. I love eating chilies. And of course, chilies are a plant that you don't need a garden for. You can grow them on a windowsill. And I keep mine indoors all the time, but in a greenhouse. I have grown chilies outside, but they never fruit as well. They love heat, and the more, the better. And the secret I've learnt over the years of getting really good chilies is to encourage them to become nice, big, strong plants early on in the year. So it's time to plant them on, and I'm putting them into these terracotta pots. The terracotta means they don't get too wet, and chilies hate sitting in wet compost. They're big enough to get a decent root system, but small enough to constrain them once they reach a certain size. And if they're feeling a little bit stressed, that will trigger more flower and fruit production. So they're the perfect balance. You need to put a crock in the bottom. Any ordinary compost that you grow tomatoes in will be fine. This is a peat-free, bark-based mix with a little bit of goodness added to it. And I'm going to put about a third full in the bottom. And this is a cayenne pepper. It's called Long Red Slim. Not too hot, but a little bit pokey. And depending on your taste, you can get a chili that will blow the top of your head off, if that's what you want, or just slightly add a touch of spice to whatever you're eating. And what you do is don't take it out of the pot, but put it in like that, and then fill around it. It's a very good way of potting on. Smooth it so it's level, and then just carefully lift it out. And what you're left with is a space exactly the size of the roots. So if I then take that out and just pop it in, and it fits perfectly. And that way I don't disturb the roots in any way at all. lift it out, pop it in, easy peasy. Still to come on today's programme, we visit the extraordinary home of Jamie Song that is filled from floor to ceiling with houseplants.
The ones that I like to hang are the rainforest cacti. So it really makes you feel like you're walking through a tropical rainforest.
And I shall be planting out dahlias for cutting and also planting my runner beans. Now, like all of us, Arit has spent more time at home and in her garden than she normally ever does. And this has meant not only having time for herself in the garden, but also having time to share it with her children.
I bought this house in 2010, my first proper garden, and like most people, I became obsessed to the point that I made a career out of it. So I have a lot to thank this garden for. Being away for work so much means I'm unable to spend as much time as I would like to in my beloved space. But in these extraordinary times, it has been a blessing for me to be able to spend more time in the garden and, importantly, set up a little kitchen area that I wanted to do with the children for our container-grown vegetables. We've put the veg in the long side return, which leads into our small leafy garden, and the children have been pretty keen to get growing.
Hello, my name is Harvey. I am 9 years old and I live with my dad, Scott, and my stepmom, Arit. Well, what I've here got in my hand is one of my sunflowers that I've been growing. I've also been growing watercress, which I love, and spinach, which I also really like.
Freya, my stepdaughter, is a teenager, and having shown little interest in the garden up until now, even she's enjoying time outside.
Hi, my name's Freya and I'm 14 years old. I've been planting quite a lot lately, so for example, I've been planting potatoes, onions, cucumber. Growing vegetables was really lovely because I've never done it before. When I planted the seeds, I didn't expect them to grow so fast.
I've always collected quirky containers and I love a dolly tub. But even I didn't have enough to create the potage-type feel for growing vegetables and flowers. So we've been recycling. Recently, I've been up to our greengrocer, who has very kindly given us these boxes that they're always just thrown away, and using those for seed trays. We've used old compost bags to line the crates, having punched them with a few drainage holes. And invention has been the order of the day. It has been about going around the home, thinking of ideas of what we can use, anything we can get a plant or a seed in. When it came to what veg to grow, the children chose the things they like to eat most. Harvey is head of peas.
I'm going to grow pea shoots. And the way I've prepared them is soak them in water for a few days. It helps speed up the germination of the peas. Just get the peas, scatter them around. You can grow them quite close because we're only going to use them as small plants. They're also very high in vitamin A, C and protein. So very good for your health. I arranged them about a penny distance apart and pushed them in with my finger. I'm just going to scatter some more soil on top of the pea shoots just to get a bit more coverage. And they should be growing in a few weeks' time. And then when I finish the scattering, I'll water them.
As we know, peas are not Harvey's only vegetable passion.
When I first put in my watercress, it was really small. But now it's been growing really well and it's roughly about 4 times or even more the size of it when it was first put in. It normally grows around slow-running streams, and what I have to do is water it at least once a day because it's a really thirsty plant. I I really like watercress. I sometimes eat it in salads or just off the plant.
Over in the very sunny seating area are our herbs, and Freya is adding to the collection.
What I'm planting in these crates are some thyme, sage and marjoram. The reason why I'm planting it in the same crate is because they're all Mediterranean plants and they like hot weather and they like well-drained soil. I'm putting parsley and chives in a separate container as they like the same amount of sun, but both like a lot more water, so they'll be fine together.
Even in this small garden, I am still getting a bit of a look in. This tree stump was an irresistible find. I've put holes in the pallet that it's sitting on, and I perforated a compost bag to line inside it. And I think this viola will really add to this corner. I do try to create little vignettes where I can that work within the space. So here, I'm under the canopy of a little acer. I have got my lovely pittosporum here, but it's creating sort of light and shade, which means it's almost woodland edge. So this log sits perfectly with a little viola coming in, because they're still going to get enough light. And it just gives this little sense of a little dell, and I can pretend that I'm in a woodland. This time has been quite special. It's meant that I've been able to spend more time with the children, and in turn that's got them out in the garden more. And I think it's been really interesting seeing them tend to their plants, look at how their seedlings are going. And it just means that they've had a new involvement. I'm also blown away about how much they've researched both the plants and how to grow their food. This family time has allowed them to connect with nature. I think one of the things that I've taken away is that the garden will always be the place to be.
I know that anybody who's got a garden and used it over this period has realised what a treasure it is. Now, this is the cottage garden, and we've got 2 cutting beds, and what that means is they are reserved exclusively for growing cut flowers. Now, I'm planting out some dahlias. I've just put in a David Howard, which has got wonderful orange flowers and dark foliage. These haven't developed to a good size, and if I put this in the dual garden now, which is where I'd like to plant it, it would suffer terribly because it would be swamped by its neighbours. And dahlia tubers get bigger as they get older. So by putting them in good, rich soil, good spacing, plenty of light, then this will get bigger, and who knows, next year it can go into the dual garden. Now, this one is a variety called tamburo. Lovely, dark, intense red flowers. When you plant dahlias and you intend them to stay outside, you need to plant them good and deep, and that means that the tubers don't get frosted. But these will be brought in once we get to October. So all I need to do is to plant them the same depth as they are in the pot. But if this was a tuber and I was planting it for the winter, I could plant it that deep. Nice and deep underground, and that will be protected, but that will go in there like that. Now, I will water these in well, and I'll make sure they don't dry out. And if you're growing dahlias in a container, it is really important to keep them well watered and well fed. And I always use liquid seaweed, but a tomato feed will do the job perfectly well. Now, if plants get old and look like they're not going to perform, quite a few people give up on them and chuck them. But you'd be surprised at how many of those seemingly hopeless cases can be revived. And we've been sent a film from someone who has taken plant rescuing to a whole new level.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I accidentally got into plant rescuing about 3 years ago. I was at a local DIY shop and I saw a member of staff binning orchids that stopped flowering. So I was horrified. I was like, stop, I'll take them. So I took a load of orchids home and they flowered again, and I found it really rewarding. And since then I've been on a mission to find as many plants as I can before they get put in the bin. And that's how this happened, and I now have over 200 plants. I've also got 3 cats, a dog, a husband and a daughter. Hello, Mog. This is one of the smallest rooms in the house, tiny bathroom. Tropical plants obviously love bathrooms because they've got some humidity. And I can show you this lovely Dracaena, which I actually picked up from the side of a road. It had been thrown out in a bin bag with no pot and no soil, and it's totally recovered. Loves it in here too. Isn't it gorgeous?
I have to say that Sarah's plants looked incredibly healthy, and it does show that a plant can look as though it's on death's door, and there's no chance of rescuing it. And with a little bit of TLC, it can burgeon back into glorious life. Good for her. I'm cutting back the spent flower stems of the Camasias. I want to take away the seed heads so that the energy goes back into the bulb for next year's flowering. And now they've gone, the attention can go on to the hostas, which are looking really healthy. I suppose I get more letters about hostas than anything else, and it's always about how to protect them from slugs and snails. It's 2 things. The first is lots of predators. So birds, mammals like hedgehogs that will eat them, frogs, and also if you've got strong, healthy plants growing in good soil, they tend to be left alone. What slugs and snails like are stressed plants. So look after the plant, and the chances are it'll be okay. Now, as well as the hostas looking good, at the moment, this is Aris pseudochorus, that is growing in the water, is at its best. And although the foliage is really dramatic and sword-like, I think the flowers are beautifully elegant. Now, of course, to have your irises growing in a pond and to have your predators eating your slugs, you need a garden. And that's fine if you've got access to one, but a lot of people don't. That doesn't mean to say that you can't have a collection of glorious plants. And last year, we went to visit the home of Jamie Song and his fabulous plants.
The first thing I see when I come up here to my indoor garden is that my plants have already woken up before me. It's just like coming into a world that's already alive. I love taking care of them, and this time you spend taking care of them is, for me, a little bit like meditation. And when I watch a plant, I can almost see the circle of life, because you know, when a leaf dies, a new one comes out, and it's just beautiful. For me, the most important thing when it comes to designing with houseplants is that you want the plants to thrive, because a sick plant or a plant that's not doing well is not going to make you happy in the end. So I always place them where they would thrive. And then, in terms of designing my indoor garden, I do my best to create different heights, but I also like to mimic nature a little bit. I've hung a lot of my plants up in the air. The ones that I like to hang are the rainforest cacti, the ones that are epiphytic in nature, so they attach themselves to trees and grow downwards. They have long leaves and such unusual shapes, so it really makes you feel like you're walking through a tropical rainforest. This is a neon pothos. In nature, a pothos would kind of coil up a tree and climb. So I decided to experiment with making it a climbing plant. So I found these little plastic clips that attach to the wall without damaging the wall. And I put the stems through the clips to create this vertical garden. And it's really become a focal point of the living room. Everybody is so impressed by it. And people love to sit on the sofa and take selfies here. So these are my mid-level plants, and they're actually my favorite plants. They're very special plants that I like to keep close to me when I'm sitting on the sofa. This is the star of the show here, this Oxalis triangularis. It looks like 100 beautiful purple butterflies. And I'm so proud of it because when I got it a few years ago, it was in a pot this big, about 10 centimeters. And now it's possibly one of the largest specimens in the country. And the special thing about it is that all these little butterflies close at night, and in the morning when the sun comes out, they open. And they actually move towards the sun during the course of the day. And it's really one of my favorites. The plants that I like to place on the lower level, directly on the floor, are the ones that have leaves facing up. So they look the best when you're looking from above down at them. This is a philodendron Xanadu. I got it from a large flat pack furniture shop, and it's been with me for such a long time, I can't imagine living without it. A very interesting thing about this plant is that when it was young, the leaves were not serrated at all. But as it aged, the shape of the leaves changed and became more and more beautiful. And now each leaf looks like a giant hand facing up. And for this plant, I actually installed a mirror up high on the wall so the sunlight gets reflected onto this spot. And I just want to give it as much sun as I possibly can. If you walk around my home, you'll see a lot of repetitions in color and texture, actually. And I have orchids dotted around the room, and it's like they're birds singing to each other. And it just gives this cohesiveness, if you will. Just like a painting needs a frame, I believe every plant needs its own pot. One of my favorite plants is my jewel orchid, or Ludicea discolor. I love its black velvety leaves. It flowers year after year in December or January, and I found this perfect pot for it. And it has a zigzaggy black pattern that goes so well with the lines on the leaves. I feel like if you only have plants that you love and you put them in the pots that you love, the stands that you love, and you combine them with the art that you love, it's a winning combination. Everyone should have houseplants.
Well, I agree about houseplants. But if you've got an outdoor garden, the greatest luxury you can possibly have is an asparagus bed. And certainly, it's one of those plants that gives you a relatively low return for a big investment. You put a huge amount of effort in, and time, and a certain amount of trouble, and you don't get much back. But what you do get back is lovely. I'm cutting under the soil. Obviously, you want nice, thick sprues, and if you've got a good, healthy plant that's really vigorous, that's what you'll get. Some of the thinner ones, it's either because the plant is a bit exhausted, or you were cutting too often, or maybe it's just a bit too dry or hasn't got enough nutrition. But drainage is the key. Drainage and sunshine, and you won't go far wrong. And they do say that you shouldn't cut your asparagus until the water to cook them in is already boiling. And then they have a freshness that is heaven. Well, life is not all luxury, I'm afraid. Here are some jobs for you this weekend. As we go into June, it's time for the Chelsea chop. This doesn't mean cutting back those plants that are finished, but reducing the height by about 1/3 to 1/2 of perennials that have not yet flowered. This will produce stronger, shorter plants with lots of side shoots and therefore lots more flowers. At this time of year, the soft, fleshy growth of broad beans coincides with the life cycle of the black bean aphid. So, to reduce the aphid, remove their food by taking out the top few inches of your broad beans. And this will also concentrate energy into the growing bean pods below. Fill the gaps left by spring flowers as they come to an end with annuals, both tender and hardy. If you haven't sown them yourself, you can buy them by the tray. Put them in the ground now while the soil is warm, and they will grow and flower very quickly. These are the Scarlet Emperor runner beans that I sowed just 3 weeks ago. And actually they've been ready to plant out for a week, but I didn't want to risk them. So now that I think the last chance of frost has gone here at Longmeadow, it's safe to get them out. And I'm planting them one plant to the base of each of these bean sticks. And there's no reason why you can't grow them in a border as well as a veg plot, as long as they've got something to cling to. And these are very decorative plants as well as being delicious. Now, the reason why the ground is slightly raised is because I added lots of garden compost underneath them. They do like moisture at their roots. So if you put plenty of organic matter in, that will preserve the moisture, even if the top inch or so is dry. In the old days, they would put old newspapers in the ground, which acted as a sponge. As well as giving these a really good soak, I will tie them in, because for the first few weeks, they need a little bit of extra support. But once they get going, these will twine around the supports, grow good and strong, and make 2 curtains of really good green foliage, those lovely red flowers, and of course, the hanging beans, which are so good to eat. Right, I'll plant the rest, but I'm afraid I'll do that after you're gone, because we've run out of time today. But I'll see you back here at Longmeadow next week. Until then, bye-bye.